There was silence in the huge concert hall. People waited with bated breath for the pianist to start playing. And he, a tall man with dark unruly hair and sad eyes, was in no hurry. The musician could not adjust to the game. His thoughts wandered elsewhere. Finally, the man lightly struck the keys of the instrument with thin fingers. A melody flowed. It should have been soft and fabulous, but the pianist turned it into a hazy ecstasy. He simply could not play any other way, although he understood that the listeners, tired after a hard day, hoped to relax. Several hours passed. A voice from the loudspeaker informed theater visitors about the end of the concert. The listeners began to leave their seats, before, of course, rewarding the pianist with applause. Only one dark-haired girl and her fair-haired friend for some reason did not leave the hall. The dark-haired woman complained that she could not get up. Her friend sighed. "Eh? Is anemia showing up again?" Rusiava asked the dark-haired woman why she went to the concert on an empty stomach. "You should have at least eaten chocolate." The redhead handed her friend a bottle of water. "Drink. Maybe it will get easier." The girl took several sips. After 3 minutes, she already felt better. The general weakness did not disappear, but at least the head did not feel dizzy. At least something. The girl told her friend that she could go without her. "Exactly?" asked the blonde. She was very worried about her dark hair. Recently, she has been behaving very strangely, somehow too confused and dreamy. Rusiava would be glad to know what the matter was, but her friend always said that everything was fine. She did not want to involve anyone else in her affairs. And now the dark-haired woman waved away the fair-haired one, as if from an annoying fly. Like, "Go already. There's no point in standing around in an almost empty theater when you've got a ton of other things to do." Rusiava had to give up. The girl went to the exit from the hall, stopping for a moment in front of the door. Rusiava asked her friend to call when she was at home. The dark-haired woman nodded her head. When the blonde finally left the hall, the girl leaned back on the soft chair and sighed in relief. No, don't think. The dark-haired woman adored her friend, but sometimes her excessive care got tired. The girl closed her eyes. She was going to rest a little before the arrival of her father, who promised to pick her up. After a few minutes, the dark-haired woman raised the armrest and lay down at full height. It was much more convenient. The girl folded her hands on her stomach and thought about the concert. More precisely, about a young pianist. For the first time, the dark-haired girl heard him play several years ago. It happened completely by accident. One of the girl's friends brought her to the concert of a handsome guy named An Haiwan. The dark-haired woman knew him as the son of the founder of I&S Group, an important person in the field of art. The girl believed that the popularity of this young musician was due to the influence of his father. After all, children of rich parents often got fame for nothing. However, the dark-haired girl changed her mind as soon as she heard An Haiwan play. The girl could not imagine that such a soft and gentle, at first glance, person could play like that. So determined and bright. The melody, which was supposed to soothe and lull like an arrow, sank into the hearts of listeners and paralyzed them. During the entire performance, the dark-haired woman could not move. She was so fascinated by the sound of the young pianist. A child's voice pulled the girl out of her thoughts about An Haiwan. "It's empty here. You can go." The dark-haired woman opened her eyes and hurried to sit down. The girl was about to leave the hall inconspicuously when she heard another voice, deep and a little hoarse. "Great, let's do everything quickly before anyone comes." The dark-haired woman froze in place. She would recognize the owner of that voice out of 1,000 people. An Haiwan. The girl had no idea what he was doing here when his concert ended a good half-hour ago. And why is the child with him? The young pianist was not married and had no relationship. Did the dark-haired woman simply not know enough about him? The girl had many questions, and despite the fact that meddling in other people's affairs is impolite, she was going to get answers to them. The dark-haired woman shrunk so that no one could see her. Meanwhile, An Haiwan sat down at the piano and started playing. In the empty hall, the melody, adored by thousands, sounded somewhat ominous. But neither the musician nor the child seemed to be bothered by this. Changes in the game surprised only the dark-haired. Already from the first notes, the girl understood that something was wrong here. The ominousness inherent in this melody gradually turned into pure brutality, and it scared the girl. The dark-haired girl cried out. At the same moment, An Haiwan stopped playing. The child, who was next to the musician all this time, asked him disgruntled why he stopped. "Quietly," the man hissed. He was convinced that there was someone in the hall, and I wanted to find that someone as soon as possible. Otherwise, problems may arise. The dark-haired woman opened her eyes wide. She was feverishly considering what to do. Get out of her hiding place by herself, or wait for them to find her. In the end, the girl chose the first option. She stood up sharply. "I'm sorry." The dark-haired girl hoped that she was heard and would not have to repeat these words. She had never felt so embarrassed. No one answered the girl after a minute or two. The dark-haired one squinted to see what was happening on stage and froze in place. A fair-haired boy was kneeling and holding a beautiful young woman in his arms, and it would be nothing if everything around was not covered in blood. But what surprised the dark-haired man the most in this situation was An Haiwan's behavior. He stood with a cigarette clamped between his thin fingers and looked at the girl. He had such an expression on his face as if nothing had happened, as if the pool of blood in which he is standing is a completely normal phenomenon. Is he a murderer? Flashed through the dark-haired woman's head. However, she of course was not going to ask him about it. The only thing the dark-haired girl wanted at that moment was to get out of there safely. But first, the girl was going to explain to An Haiwan why she was here. The dark-haired one said that she was feeling dizzy, so she stayed in the hall for a while to rest. After that, the girl ran to the exit. An Haiwan watched her silently. When the door closed behind the dark-haired one, the boy who had been sitting silently all this time begged An Haiwan. The boy believed that he had caused trouble to the pianist and felt ashamed for it, but the musician, it seems, was not offended at all. He told the boy to leave this woman here and go home himself. "Don't worry, I'll handle everything." An Haiwan flashed his yellow-brown eyes. Meanwhile, in the corridor, the dark-haired woman quickly descended the stairs. At the same time, the girl constantly looked around to make sure that no one was chasing her. She was scared the hell out of her, which was normal. Anyone would be frightened to see a famous musician, a little boy and a bloody woman in a concert hall. The dark-haired girl tripped over a step and fell to the cold floor. Despite the pain in her knee, the girl was able to stand up. She wrapped her arms around herself to calm herself down a little. But the panic did not recede. The dark-haired woman didn't know what to do. Call the police, scream, or just run away. The best option was to tell the cops what had happened, but the dark-haired woman had left her purse with her phone in the concert hall. The girl ran up to the large oak door and began to knock on it with all her might. She called for help, cried, but no one responded. This continued for several minutes, until An Haiwan's voice was heard from behind the girl. "Someone has been with you all this time." The dark-haired turned her head and froze in place. She was afraid to even move. Who knows what is on the mind of a man who has killed a person or was an accomplice to a murder? The musician smiled. He didn't want to scare the girl, but there was no point in telling her about it. She would hardly understand it in this state. The man took out the dark-haired woman's phone from his jacket pocket. "Do you need this?" the musician said in a soft tone that, unfortunately, he could not give the dark-haired woman her thing just now. An Haiwan hoped that his words would not frighten the poor fellow even more. The dark-haired girl knelt down and folded her hands in a prayer gesture. The girl closed her eyes and began to whisper an apology for seeing more than she should have. The brunette promised never to tell anyone about this situation. "Just spare me, please," she sobbed quietly. An Haiwan sighed. Well, he will have to do his best to calm the girl down and deal with everything peacefully. The pianist got down on one knee in front of the dark-haired woman and quietly asked her name. The girl recoiled. It seems the dark-haired woman thought this was some special maneuver to trap her, but she also could not answer. The girl was afraid to anger An Haiwan by being silent, so after a few seconds, despite loud sobbing and trembling throughout her body, the dark-haired woman was able to say her name. "Khan." The man raised a cigarette to his lips and thoughtfully repeated, "Can so." He thought what he should do with this young miss. As we already understood, he was not going to kill her, but he couldn't just let go either. And suddenly she will still tell someone about what she saw in the theater? An Haiwan decided that it would be best to explain everything to Kang. He directed his gaze at the girl and began his story. "You see, I am somewhat different from you." But the dark-haired woman did not want to hear him. She repeated an apology and a promise to remain silent like a mantra. An Haiwan fell silent. The man realized that Kang was not able to adequately perceive what he was saying. The voice of fear in her head shouted over the musician. An Haiwan stared at the floor. The man wanted to give the girl some time so that she herself understood that she was not in danger. Suddenly, someone's quiet steps were heard. The musician turned his head and saw a fair-haired boy who was with him in the hall. The little one, who was holding a box with something in his hands, was smiling. "Are you going to kill this Nuna?" he asked. The dark-haired woman's blood froze in her veins. The girl thought that the boy was An Haiwan's accomplice. She began to tremble again and begged the pianist not to kill her. "I'm still too young to die," she whispered. An Haiwan put his hand to his forehead and closed his eyes. It must be admitted that he was a little tired of this little spectacle. Only the dark-haired woman more or less calmed down when the little one appeared, who frightened her even more. "Alexei Richter," said the pianist in a slightly irritated tone, "your ability to show up at the wrong time sometimes amazes me." But the little one didn't bat an eye. He approached the girl and handed her a box of sweets. "Eat." The dark-haired woman surprisingly accepted the gift. An Haiwan stood up and asked Alex what he was doing here. The pianist asked him to go home. Why did the little one listen to him? But the boy again did not pay attention to the man's reproaches. Instead, he asked him not to kill the girl. The little one said that he had already had enough. And besides, her blood is tasteless, because it contains very little sugar. The dark-haired girl, who was carefully listening to their conversation, already had time to regret 1,000 times that she did not agree to her friend's offer to go with her. Kang was not even able to talk to her father for the last time. Suddenly, the dark-haired woman dropped a box of candies from her hands. Multicolored dragées fell apart. The girl hastily began to collect them. Kang put a few candies in her mouth. They tasted quite pleasant and ordinary. An Haiwan told his little friend that he had been reckless in coming down here. Mali apologized to the musician. Khan stared at the two in silence. The pianist leaned over to the little boy and whispered in his ear that he should perform a trick with their new acquaintance. It will be easier than explaining everything to her. An Haiwan knelt down in front of Kang again and raised his hand to her face. Fortunately for the pianist, the girl did not move. The man made eye contact with her and began to say in a soft tone that it was all a dream. Warm magic enveloped the girl, and she seemed to fall asleep. The dark-haired woman opened her eyes 10 minutes later when she was blinded by the light from the lantern. "Why are you still here, miss?" came the voice of the guard to the girl. The dark-haired girl clenched her hand into a fist in excitement and said uncertainly that she had fallen asleep. The security guard asked her to leave as soon as possible because he had to close the theater in half an hour. The dark-haired woman followed the man in silence. The events that took place in her strange dream were spinning in the girl's head. Killing a beautiful woman, falling down the stairs, having a strange conversation with An Haiwan and the blonde kid. The girl pulled up her skirt a little to make sure there was nothing on her knee. The dark-haired woman sighed in relief when she saw a whole smooth skin. So, all this is just a figment of her imagination. The dark-haired woman adjusted the sleeve of her blouse, as one small orange candy fell out of it. The girl opened her eyes wide. Where did she get it from? She never carried sweets with her, especially for concerts. The girl quickly found the candy with her eyes and picked it up. Here, memories flashed through the dark-haired girl's head. An Haiwan's words that he was different from other people. His thin fingers that almost touched her face. The dark-haired woman looked at the piano, which for some reason had not yet been removed from the stage. It seemed to the girl that she could still hear that melody. Cruel and furious. Only An Haiwan could play like that. Only him and no one else. 4 months later, the dark-haired woman worked in the office. After that strange evening at the Cannes Theater, nothing special happened, and it upset her a little. All days were equally calm and gray. Kang even slightly regretted not listening to An Haiwan then. Maybe her life would change forever. A colleague's voice pulled the girl out of her thoughts. "Do you have plans for the evening?" the dark-haired woman asked. It seems that she did not immediately understand that they were addressing her. That woman had already turned her back on Kang and said that they would have to work after the day was over. Kang did not object, and not because she was afraid of her colleague's anger or was simply too soft. No, the dark-haired girl just didn't want to argue. What is the difference? How to spend the evening? Watching the next series or writing reports? None of these things interested the girl. Yes, Khan definitely needed something new. Something that could slightly diversify the gray everyday life. Perhaps meetings with old friends or a trip somewhere. After a few seconds, the girl's phone vibrated. Khan glanced at the screen. It was Jung, her old friend. The same fair-haired girl who had gone with her to one of An Hee-won's concerts. The dark-haired woman went out into the corridor and only then picked up the phone. Kang asked her friend what happened. Rusyava replied that she was going to Seoul next week. She quit her job. Kang was not very surprised by this fact. After all, her friend wasn't the type of person who spends years doing something that doesn't interest them. The blonde suggested that the dark-haired one somehow go to the pastry shop they were planning to visit. Kang replied that she would be able to meet her friend. "I should have some free time next week," added the dark-haired woman. The girl did not see her friend, but guessed that she was happy. Next week. The dark-haired woman was sitting at a table in the same pastry shop and was holding 2 tickets to the INS Group art exhibition. Kang's friend brought them. The girl could imagine what efforts the blonde woman had to take to get them. After all, tickets for such exhibitions are flying like hotcakes. The blonde put her hands together and smiled sweetly at Kan. I barely had time to buy them. I had to ask a distant relative to get them, but it was worth it. Chong had wanted to go somewhere with a dark-haired woman for a long time. Kan shuddered as she remembered how their last cultural outing had ended. But the blonde didn't let her say a word. She enthusiastically told her friend about the participants of the exhibition. According to the gossips, all the artists of the INS group will be there, even those who usually do not appear in public. The dark-haired woman clutched the tickets in her hands. The girl convinced herself that what happened 4 months ago was a dream. So, nothing to worry about, right? A few days later, hall of the largest exhibition center in Korea. People hurriedly walked and looked at the paintings. Kang and Young noticed a tall blonde woman in a red dress. "It's Adele Mertu," exclaimed the blonde. Adele was the girl's favorite singer, but I've been dreaming of getting her autograph for a long time. Jong attended almost all the events where Adele was, but the woman did not often pay attention to her fans. She did not like to communicate with the public outside the stage, during her rest, and now Adele didn't even look in Chong's direction. The girl was a little upset about this, but not for long. A new star appeared in the hall, An Haiwan. He came to the event with his sister, a talented artist, An Ji-won. Both of them were dressed simply impeccably. Ji-won's black suit matched Ji-won's white translucent dress. If people didn't know that these two were brother and sister, they would definitely mistake them for a couple. An Haiwan, like a true gentleman, helped his sister sit on one of the soft chairs. Kan watched the pianist and the artist in silence. The girl remembered that An Haiwan doesn't smoke because his sister has asthma. Well, it turns out that what Kang saw 4 months ago really was a dream. After all, An Haiwan was holding a cigarette in his hands. Chong, meanwhile, had already managed to get an autograph from the musician. Rusyava turned her head towards Kun and asked if she would like to do the same. "You are almost the most ardent admirer of his work," said Chong. The dark-haired woman forced a smile. She was ready to strangle her friend for such an amateur act. Kang decided to pretend that she forgot An Haiwan's CD at home, so unfortunately she won't be able to get an autograph. The blonde immediately exposed her friend. Jung told An Haiwan not to listen to the dark-haired man. She always carries several of his discs with her. The pianist laughed softly. He was amused by the persistence of the fair-haired woman and the indecision of the dark-haired woman. The man convinced Jung that he would give her friend an autograph. His colleague Adele just had a few CDs. He asked the woman to give them, to which she kindly agreed. The man tapped a pen on one of the discs and asked the dark-haired woman what her name was. The girl smiled sadly. An Haiwan's question was another confirmation that she had dreamed that scene in the hall. After all, that evening the dark-haired woman told her husband that her name was Kang. The girl repeated her name. An Haiwan gave his fan the disc and thanked her for such devoted love for him and his work. Suddenly, the dark-haired woman felt the strange warmth that enveloped her in that dream. The thought appeared in Khan's head that perhaps what he had seen that evening was not a dream. The girl shuddered at this assumption, although it seemed somewhat absurd to her. After all, she has already found so much evidence to the contrary. Nevertheless, the girl decided to test her theory. There was one way to do it. The dark-haired woman went to the dressing room before telling her friend that she would be away for a while. Kang took her phone out of her pocket and found one photo in the gallery. The stars of this evening were depicted on it. Among them, the dark-haired one was most interested in the fair-haired boy who was standing next to An Haiwan's sister. The dark-haired woman was sure she saw him in her dream. She would never forget those sweet eyes. Kang began to search for information about him on the internet. The boy, named Alex Richter, was a prodigy in the field of painting. At such a young age, he has already managed to create several sculptures, which were bought for several $1,000,000 each. The dark-haired woman remembered the face of this little one that evening. His mouth was bloody. And that woman, the woman he was holding in his arms, was she dead? What's up with her now? The dark-haired woman had many questions, but one thing she knew for sure: it was not a dream. Khan stared at the floor. The girl thought what to do. She definitely wouldn't be able to pretend that everything was normal, but also tell someone about it. It is unlikely that a person in their right mind will believe this. Suddenly, the dark-haired girl heard An Haiwan's voice. "Then you remember everything," said the man. The dark-haired girl looked around sharply but did not see anyone. The dark-haired woman thought what she thought. Then An Haiwan appeared in the mirror, and in the man's fingers was a cigarette. Like that evening. Kang was about to run out of the restroom when An Haiwan's hands grabbed her. The man gently and at the same time firmly held her waist. He flashed his eyes and told the girl that he had prepared everything for a conversation with her. Tears welled up in the eyes of the dark-haired woman. She was afraid of this man again. Khan could not forget that pool of blood in which he stood on the stage. Is the young pianist really a murderer? And if he turns on her now? The girl was even more excited. An Haiwan noticed this. He sighed and told the girl that she should go to contact. Otherwise, they may have small problems. The girl took this phrase as a threat and began to sob. Through her sobs, she shouted that she would tell everyone, as if the pianist was clinging to her. But this did not frighten or anger the musician. He said in a calm tone that Kang had no evidence. Then he looked into the dark-haired woman's eyes and asked her where they were. The dark-haired man was a little surprised by such a question. How is that where? In the ladies' room, of course. The man advised the girl to look around. The dark-haired girl turned her head to the side and cried out. The simple but elegant interior of the dressing room was transformed into a grand hall, in the middle of which stood a piano. An Haiwan squeezed Kang's shoulder lightly and said that they were in his workshop. The dark-haired girl looked down at the floor. There were fragments of glass. Broken mirror, guessed the girl. So it turns out that they got to this place through an ordinary mirror in the dressing room. The man noticed the girl's surprise. He touched the piano with his hand and said that he could move in space. This is one of the first abilities. The dark-haired woman opened her eyes wide. Firsts? She had never heard such a word. Are they some magical creatures or something? And suddenly they are dangerous. The dark-haired girl was about to scream when An Haiwan stopped her. He warned the girl that if she behaved loudly, she herself would suffer from it. Then he would tell the others that she was stalking him. The pianist flashed his eyes. I'll beat you with your weapon, Miss Khan. The dark-haired woman retreated, took a step back and tripping over something fell to the floor. The girl asked An Haiwan who the hell he was. And why did he bring her here? Does he want to commit another murder or something? The pianist broke into a mocking smile and took out a cigarette from his pants pocket. He took a deep breath of bitter smoke, after which he said that he would not answer all the girl's questions in turn. As for the man's essence, he is a being who knows how to collect other people's memories. The dark-haired girl wondered why she remembered everything that happened that evening. The man replied that his charm simply did not work on her. The dark-haired woman asked why this happened. Is she really special? The man lowered his hand with the cigarette. He thought about it himself, but he couldn't find any reason why the girl managed to counteract his magic. That is why the pianist brought the dark-haired man to his studio. He wanted to talk to her and find out everything. But you shouldn't consider yourself special. The man put out his cigarette. After all, you're an ordinary person. The dark-haired woman clenched her hand into a fist. Although the girl did not claim the title of superhuman, she was still touched by the words of the pianist. Khan thought he wanted to insult and humiliate her. But okay, this is no time for insults. The dark-haired woman decided that it would be better to find out who the first ones were. She asked her husband to tell about these creatures. He answered that the firstborn are the embodiment of mortal sins. For example, I am proud. The man lowered his head. As for food, the primordials feed on human feelings, absorbing ecstasy. Mere mortals also call these creatures incubi. The man began to list everything that people like him eat: joy, fear, sadness, anger, shame. But that evening the child drank blood. The girl dared to kill the pianist. An Haiwan just smiled. She and Alex belonged to different species. The little genius is a gullah or a vampire. But the fact that Richter ravages human bodies does not mean that he is a heathen. There is simply no other way out, like other similar creatures. The dark-haired woman carefully moved away from her husband. Did he bring her here to eat? I wonder if she will stay alive. Because, from a technical point of view, ecstasy is not as necessary for existence as blood. Khan decided to cautiously ask the pianist about it. He shook his head. He wasn't going to feed on her emotions. They could not bring pleasure to a man. And he didn't want to eat anything. And besides, it would not be nutritious at all. An Haiwan leaned towards the dark-haired woman and touched her chin with his hand. The musician said that he needs a lot of emotions to get his fill, and the dark-haired man can only offer fear now. Well, and maybe a little outrage. The man said that the primordials have been exploring human emotions from the point of view of utility since ancient times. People do the same with ordinary products. The man approached the piano and touched the keys with his fingers. The greatest number of bright and nourishing emotions can be obtained thanks to art. It excites people, discovers something completely new in them, something they didn't even know existed. The dark-haired woman shuddered, so a pianist eats with the help of his playing. The man nodded and added that his sister's way of making a living is drawing. The girl looked at the man with wide eyes. What she found out, of course, shocked her. But now the dark-haired man was much more interested in his own fate. The musician never answered what he would do with her. The man said he needed to think. Think? Asked the dark-haired woman. That is, maybe he will not kill her. Well, not bad. An Haiwan said that it is very easy to take a person's life, and it is not difficult to hide a corpse so that no one finds it. But the man simply did not like to kill. It was too boring for him, and he, as we have already understood, is not used to doing boring things. But you see, An Haiwan began, I can't just let you go. The dark-haired girl asked what the musician wanted from her. The man smiled faintly. Finally, they got down to business. The musician brushed the dust off his shoulder and said that Alex, whom he sometimes helps, had some problems. But they can be solved with the help of Khan. First, you need to put a label on the girl. Alarum. The dark-haired woman opened her eyes and looked at the phone screen. 9 a.m. Khan looked around. She was in her room. Well, was she having another stupid dream? The dark-haired woman got up and went to the mirror. Thin pajamas instead of a black dress, disheveled hair instead of a more or less tidy hairstyle. Suddenly, Kang noticed a small red spot on her neck. One would think that it was an insect bite, but the dark-haired woman remembered An Haiwan's words about the mark well. So Kang came to the conclusion that all this was definitely not a dream. Here someone called the girl's apartment. The dark-haired woman went to the door and glanced at the screen of the intercom. A thin woman in a blue jacket and a cap that covered almost half of her face. Khan was surprised. She asked the stranger who she was. The woman replied that she is a member of the I and S group community. The dark-haired girl was talking to her brother yesterday. Khan froze in place. Brother? Meanwhile, the stranger leaned towards the door. The dark-haired woman looked closely and realized that the stranger behind the door was An Ji-won, an artist known throughout Korea. An Ji-won asked the girl to finally open the door. I don't like to wait a long time at the door. The artist smiled. The dark-haired woman hastened to turn the key in the lock. An Ji-won entered the apartment. The woman glanced at the dark-haired woman who was still in her pajamas and told her to get ready. They don't have much time. But Kang could not move. Although the dark-haired woman complained about her quiet life for several days, now she would give a lot to return to the time when she could work quietly in the office and watch TV shows after work. An Ji-won noticed the mark on the girl's neck. The artist took a step towards the dark-haired woman to look at the spot. The woman said it was the label of the contract her brother made with Khan. The dark-haired woman asked what kind of contract she was talking about. The artist explained the terms of the agreement to the dark-haired woman in an indifferent tone. If Kang tells anyone about the characteristics of An Haiwan and his family and friends, she will die. The girl silently stared at the artist. Will die if An Haiwan said something like that. She would definitely remember it. The artist sat down on the couch. She didn't seem bothered by Khan's behavior at all. The artist did not even try to calm her down or bring her out of her stupor. For some reason, the dark-haired woman asked how exactly she would die if she violated the terms of the contract. The artist flashed her eyes slyly. You really want to know? Khan nodded uncertainly. Not to say that the girl was particularly interested in her own death, but that way she would at least know what to prepare for. An Ji-won leaned back on the couch. Your brain is popping like a balloon. The girl opened her eyes wide. Quite an original way to die. An Ji-won told the dark-haired woman to go to the shower and get herself in shape. It is not very polite to go to someone else's house in your pajamas. The girl nervously tugged at her hand. Just now? The woman nodded her head and said that from now on they would come for Khan every day. According to the terms of the contract, the girl is obliged to be Alex Richter's food and punching bag. The dark-haired girl entered the bathroom, closed the door and leaned her back against it. The girl tried to remember how she made the deal with An Haiwan. Khan closed her eyes and sighed. Suddenly memories began to appear in her head, which were combined into a complete picture. Pianist's workshop. The man smoking his 10th cigarette said that Alex needed food. And Kang is a great food. It may not be very sweet, but in the conditions of food shortage, little Richter will be happy about that too. The dark-haired girl timidly said that she could hardly be someone's food. Firstly, she is anemic, and secondly, a vampire's bite is fatal. The man smiled. He wasn't surprised that the dark-haired woman believed all this stupid talk about vampires and magical creatures in general. but the musician was going to dispel her illusions. Vampires don't kill their victims unless they have to. Regarding the anemia, don't worry. There are charms that will keep your health normal. The man shrugged his shoulders. The dark-haired woman wondered why he was taking such care of that boy. Is little Richter a relative of An Haiwan or something? The musician froze in place. The cigarette stung his thin fingers a little, but he ignored it. The pianist thought about what to answer the girl. After all, he said he was keeping a promise he made to his old friend, and in general this does not apply to dark-haired people. The man flashed his eyes angrily, letting the girl understand that she should not poke her nose into other people's affairs. All that is required of her is a small amount of blood and helping Alex with his studies. The dark-haired girl bowed her head and clenched her hands into fists. She was very annoyed by her husband's defiant behavior. The dark-haired woman was not going to obey him so easily. The girl mustered up all the remnants of her courage and said with a slight tremor in her voice that she would not help An Haiwan or his pet. She didn't want to be a pet for magical creatures. The man opened his eyes wide. Although the dark-haired woman was an ordinary person, he had to admit that he had never met someone so strange. The girl could resist his charms and could defend her sense of self-worth. Yes, she interested the musician, but he was not going to talk about it. At least, it will be ugly if this young miss is exposed. Let her better think that she is really just a pet, from whom they want to get as much benefit as possible. The dark-haired woman tried to express her indignation at the man, but he silenced her with just a look. The musician smiled mockingly and said that humans mean nothing to magical creatures. They are only food and nothing more. Cruelly? Maybe, but that's the world. The dark-haired woman kept her eyes on the musician. The girl was very offended, but she remained silent, because she already understood that this was the best option. After all, the man answered her every word very harshly. An Haiwan leaned into the dark-haired woman's neck and whispered that his words were not an offer to cooperate. The man simply gave the dark-haired woman a choice, to continue living her usual life or to disappear without a trace. The girl didn't even have time to say a word when An Haiwan pressed his lips to her neck. Khan yelped in surprise. The man pressed her closer to him. So he concluded a contract with the dark-haired woman without her consent. Khan snapped out of her memories. The girl felt simply terrible. An Haiwan, a young and talented pianist whom she adored, turned out to be a real monster. Suddenly the dark-haired girl heard An Jiwan's disgruntled voice. How much longer? The artist is already tired of waiting for the dark-haired. The girl shouted that she would come out in 10 minutes. A month later, dark-haired once again came to the house where little Richter lived. The boy greeted Kang and asked how she got here. Did that nun give you a lift again? The little one was talking about An Haiwan's sister. The dark-haired woman nodded her head in confusion. Alex said that the girl was pale. Khan laughed heartily. And what will she be like after the trip with An Haiwan's sister? An Jiwan turned out to be just that thing. Over the course of a month, the dark-haired girl learned a lot about the artist. First, her shyness was only a mask. An Jiwan loved to make noise and make scathing comments towards people she didn't like. Secondly, the woman loved to smoke. The dark-haired woman was very surprised when she saw An Jiwan with a cigarette in her hand. You have asthma. The artist only laughed at this. In fact, she did not have asthma. Her diagnosis was just a touching story for a sensitive audience. Third, An Jiwan simply adored speed. Every trip with her turned into a game of survive or die. Fortunately, during the month that the dark-haired woman traveled with the woman, nothing critical happened. Well, if you don't take into account the crumpled bumper of someone else's car. But the artist promised to fix everything. Khan smiled as she remembered this. Alex approached the girl and said that he was glad to see her. Despite the creepy feature of this little one, the dark-haired man liked him. The boy seemed to Khan the most normal of all her new acquaintances. After concluding the contract with An Haiwan, the dark-haired woman became Alex's home teacher. Not to say that the girl really wanted it, but she had no choice. And working out with little Richter was quite interesting. He knew a lot and was kind to the dark-haired woman. The little one smiled sweetly. This morning I tried to charm people with the art of sculpture. The boy took a few pieces of chocolate from a small vase on the table and handed them to Khan. The girl thanked the boy and asked if he wanted to practice on her. Alex refused. He has already eaten properly. The dark-haired woman was surprised. When did he make it? The boy said he ate at one of An Haiwan's recent concerts, but the little one really liked the blood. The girl shuddered involuntarily. Because of Richter's kind behavior, she almost forgot that he is not a person, but a bloodthirsty monster. Orphans stood out on the dark-haired woman's skin. and suddenly the little one wants to kill her someday. But Kang quickly pushed those thoughts away from her. Don't screw yourself up. If you're constantly afraid, you can go crazy. And she didn't want this dark-haired one at all. She was just a step away from madness recently. The girl became uncomfortable with her own thoughts, so she decided to talk about something with young Richter. The topic for conversation was found very quickly. A pleasant melody came from the next room. The dark-haired girl guessed that it was Hee-won's game. Little Alex said that the man hardly parted with his piano, and not only because art is his only way to eat. No, An Hye-won really loved what he did. The man was a unique musician. He interpreted world-famous compositions in his own way. Kan closed her eyes and leaned back on the sofa. The dark-haired woman enjoyed the musician's performance. She could listen to his tunes forever. Alex noticed the relaxed expression on the girl's face and slyly said that she seemed to be a fan of An Hye-won. The dark-haired woman blushed, but did not deny it. And the point is, if little Richter doesn't believe her, it is not so easy to deceive him. Fortunately, the boy quickly switched to another topic. He wanted to tell the girl about magical creatures. Kan revived. On the night of the contract, An Hye-won had given her some information about the Inhumans, but it wasn't enough to understand everything. Little Richter said that he and An Hye-won are of the night kind. The night genus, in turn, is divided into several species. The most common of them are mermaids, elves, werewolves, and demons. Within each species, there are also higher beings, the ruling states of sorts, which are part of the dark night community. An Hye-won is just one of the higher beings. He is a priest, such as a musician, Units. Alex Richter is an ordinary vampire, but also a half-breed. The child's mother was an ordinary person, and his father was a bloodsucker. When Alex was born, members of the Richter family were obsessed with killing him. They believed that the baby was a monster, not worth living. An Hye-won saved the boy. He took the child to himself and implanted the monster's heart into his body. When the boy becomes a full-fledged vampire, the musician will cut out his heart to revive the dead monster. The dark-haired man was impressed by the boy's story. The girl felt sorry for him. Is it possible to do so? Use a child as a vessel to store a monster's heart? Kan considered it disgusting and immoral. Little Richter had a different attitude to the situation. He was grateful to An Hye-won. As much as he was a musician, the boy would have been killed as a baby, so he would at least be able to live to adulthood. The dark-haired girl asked Richter who the monster was, whose heart was beating in his body. Gulbacha, answered the little man. A tall blonde man, as An Hye-won told me about him. Gulbaha, like the musician, belonged to the priests, so it is not surprising that his heart is very important to the community of magical beings. In addition to Gulbacha's part, little Richter also kept his jewel. The boy loosened his tie and carefully pushed back the collar of his shirt. The dark-haired woman saw a thin silver chain on which a massive red stone hung. Alex said this gem is called Lilith's heart. Lilith is the progenitor of almost all magical creatures. She created them from the 7 deadly sins and then placed her powers in the 7 gems. Usually they are kept by priests. But Lilith's heart is an exception to the rule. An Hye-won gave the gem to little Richter to facilitate Gulbaha's resurrection process in the future. Alex frowned and cupped the stone in his small hand. Richter, despite his tender age, was very serious about the mission entrusted to him. The dark-haired one asked the little one where An Hye-won got Lilith's heart from. The boy replied that Gulbaha had given the musician a jewel. The fair-haired priest felt his death approaching, so he took care of the possibility of his rebirth in advance. Alex quickly hid the stone under his shirt and flashed his green eyes. Well, at least that's what they say. Gulbaha's trust in An Hye-won could be explained by their friendship. In the past, they went together and collected jewels of every kind. In addition, the 2 priests had a similar character. Both of them were known as cruel and somewhat hot-tempered creatures. And not in vain. Gulbaha killed his own father and became the emperor of the ancient kingdom. But the fair-haired man was not destined to rule happily ever after. It was said that the spirit of the late emperor cursed his own son, depriving him of his mind. New York. An apartment in one of the metropolises. In a bright, spacious room, An Ji-won was sitting on a sofa, dressed in a white dress decorated with flowers and butterflies. The woman, as always, was smoking a cigarette. "Why do you ask me about the curse of eternal life?" The artist turned to the person who was in the next room. That person was Kan. The girl looked at herself in the mirror. The dark-haired woman replied to her interlocutor that Alex told her about Gulbahe, and slandered that An Hye-won's sister knew more about it than he did. An Ji-won arched an eyebrow. She was surprised that Richter would talk about such serious things with a mere mortal. The little one was not frivolous. Well, if he did, Khan can probably be trusted. An Ji-won inhaled the cigarette smoke. She said that eternal life could hardly be seen as a curse. For example, I got it thanks to An Hai-wan. The woman's voice softened. The artist believed that the man had acted very mercifully towards her. After all, not every priest will help a miserable dying being, even if this creature is his sister. Khan lowered her head. Dark-haired was not very pleased to realize that the musician was friendly to everyone except humans. No, he followed the basic rules of politeness, of course, but when it came to anything more than basic conversation, An Hee-won wore a mask of indifference. Khan recalled how a man called her a beach bag during a tea party. Even Alex, who was also present at the event, was surprised by such a statement towards his Nuna. But that day, An Hee-won had hurt the dark-haired woman much more than verbal rudeness. The man told Khan that she was going to New York with Alex. The dark-haired girl didn't really like the prospect of being in a strange city one-on-one with magical creatures, but no one asked her. An Ji-won asked why Kang was standing in the bathtub for so long. The girl shuddered in surprise. "Is everything okay? Is the dress too small or too big?" The artist was worried. The dark-haired girl said that everything was fine, she just wasn't very comfortable accepting such an expensive dress as a gift. But for Anne's incredibly rich family, designer items cost next to nothing, so the dark-haired woman didn't have to worry about the price of the dress. After a few minutes, Khan finally got out of the bath. A black dress with an open top suited the dark-haired woman very well. An Ji-won dryly noted this and grabbed the dark-haired man's hand. They had to hurry. Khan noticed how the woman's expression changed. He became somehow unhappy. An Ji-won said that it should be. She just fit into the image of the shy, innocent sister of An Hai-won, an artist with a very fine mental organization. That's how she wanted to appear in front of the public. The woman asked the dark-haired woman if she smelled of cigarettes. How much noise can be made if someone finds out that the sickly-looking An Ji-won smokes like a steam train? Fortunately, the smell did not remain. The ladies went down to the first floor, where makeup artists were already waiting for them. Kang did an incredible makeup. The girl had never seen herself so beautiful. An Ji-won smiled from the corner of her mouth and took out a bottle of perfume from her purse. The woman carefully sprinkled them on the dark-haired woman's neck. Khan said she couldn't smell anything. An Ji-won flashed her eyes and began to explain the effects of this perfume to the dark-haired woman. It turns out that they only have a scent for magical creatures. The artist used them on Kang to notice the girl. It sounds strange, but it is so. Magical creatures who smell this smell will understand that the dark-haired person is someone's personal food and will not touch it. Kang asked the woman about the tag that An Hai-won once gave her. The girl believed that this mark had disappeared from her body. At least in the morning, she no longer saw the small red spot on her neck in the mirror. An Ji-won walked over to Kang and ran her slender fingers over the girl's shoulder. The artist said that the label is still there. It's just not so bright now. The woman saw that Khan was somewhat upset by her words, so she decided to change the subject. She asked the dark-haired one to hold on to An Hee-won at the party. The dark-haired woman asked why. An Ji-won pulled the girl by the hand. How is that why? He is a priest of the first, one of the most powerful magical beings. You will definitely be completely safe with him. Khan and the artist left the apartment and went down to the first floor of the building. An Hai-won was already waiting for them outside. The man smiled gently at Khan and said that she looked incredible today. The dark-haired woman became confused. An Hai-won had never complimented her before, but here he is. The girl wanted to thank him, but the man moved away from her and started talking to his sister. Unpleasant, but quite expected. Alex, who was waiting outside with his guardian, told the dark-haired girl to get into the car. A security guard in a black suit opened the car door for Khan. The dark-haired girl sank down on the soft leather seat as An Hai-won's hands touched her. The man leaned towards the dark-haired woman and buried his nose in her hair. Khan closed her eyes. She felt good, and at the same time scared from her husband's touch. You never know what to expect from him. Suddenly he wants to put another mark on the dark-haired man, but the girl's suspicions were dispelled when the man moved away from her a little and spoke to his sister. How much perfume did you spray on her? An Ji-won, who was busy looking at herself in the small mirror, replied that she sprayed the perfume on the dark-haired woman's neck twice, once on the left and once on the right. The man said that was not enough. He asked his sister to give him perfume and reached for Khan again. The girl was indignant, but the pianist paid no attention to it. He carefully sprayed some perfume on the dark-haired woman's shoulder. Half an hour passed. The Heewon family's car stopped near a huge building that looked like a luxury hotel. The dark-haired woman got out of the car and opened her eyes wide. How beautiful. Alex smiled. The little one understood his nun's delight. He guessed that not all mere mortals could afford a luxurious life. But for magical beings, designer things and huge houses were not something extraordinary. Suddenly, the dark-haired girl heard an unfamiliar voice. The girl turned her head and saw that An Heewon was talking to a tall, blonde man. The stranger looked a lot like Khan Alex. The girl assumed that they were relatives. An Heewon confirmed her guess when he named the blonde as Mr. Richter. The musician's voice was cold. It seems that he was not very happy to meet one of the Richters. And the girl was not surprised. How can it be normal to perceive people who wanted to kill a baby? Mr. Richter tilted his head to one side and thanked the An family for taking care of his nephew in a feigned polite tone. Haiwan and Jiwon were silent. The blonde noticed Khan and gave a predatory smile. The man told the pianist that Alex got a good Rolton. The dark-haired girl pursed her lips. Again, these taunts from magical creatures. She is already used to the fact that they consider themselves better than others. An Haiwan frowned. It seems that he did not like Richter's words. The musician told the blonde that he would talk to him later. The pianist was about to leave when Mr. Richter asked him to stay a moment. The blonde looked at Alex and flashed his eyes. The man expressed his desire to chat with his beloved nephew. Alex tensed. He did not want to communicate with Richter Sr. The dark-haired girl lightly squeezed the boy's shoulder, like everything will be fine. The girl hoped that they would ignore the blonde's request and leave here. But An Haiwan had other plans. The musician turned his head in Alex's direction and told him to talk to his uncle for a bit before coming back to them. Khan's eyes widened. Is the pianist going to leave the child with this monster? How is that even possible? An Haiwan ran his hand over the boy's head and said in a soothing tone that everything was fine. The musician asked his sister to stay with the little one, just in case. An Jiwon silently nodded her head. The woman approached the fair-haired man and bowed to him. She said she has long been interested in the works of the elder Richter. Alex smiled. If An Jiwon behaves like this, then the situation is definitely under control. The boy approached his relatives, and the woman remained standing aside. An Haiwan leaned over and told her that he would be with Kang on the roof. Before leaving, the man took off his jacket and threw it over the woman's shoulders. The musician returned to Kang. He noticed the concern on the girl's face, so he gave her an encouraging smile. The man took her by the elbow and led her towards the entrance to the building. A few minutes later, the dark-haired man and the pianist were already riding in the elevator. The girl asked An Jiwon if everything would be okay with Alex and An Jiwon. She was very worried about these two, even though they were non-humans. The pianist sighed, and with a note of irritation in his voice replied that his sister and Alex could get it. The dark-haired woman froze in place. She expected a different answer from the musician. The girl thought that he left Jiwon and Alex with the elder Richter, because he was sure that they were not in any danger. An Heewon ignored the range of emotions on Kang's face. Instead, he decided to talk to her about something. The man asked the dark-haired man if Alex had told her about the jewel. She answered uncertainly that she had heard about something like that. An Haiwan stated that the elder Richter and his gang would try to take the precious from the little one. For the girl, everything became even more confusing. If the musician knew that the fair-haired vampire was preparing an attack on his nephew, why did he leave? The man replied that this would give the An family a reason to attack the Richters. As soon as one of the vampires touches Alex, Haiwan will be able to attack his enemies without any problems. In my opinion, the man smiled faintly. A brilliant plan. But the dark-haired woman did not think so. And suddenly something happens to Alex. The man replied that that was why he left Jiwon with the little one. The immortal artist will definitely be able to pull the little one out of that world if anything. The couple left the elevator. An Haiwan's words calmed the dark-haired girl somewhat, but she still found his act disgusting. Poor Jiwon will have to face the vampires alone. And besides, if Alex doesn't die, that doesn't mean he won't be harmed. Little Richter can be seriously maimed, but the musician doesn't seem to care at all. The dark-haired woman stood in front of An Heewon and shouted that he was a narcissistic turkey who only cared about himself and his precious friend. An Heewon spread a mocking smile. Looks like our Miss Kang found out about Gulbaha Aziz Shahar. The man mentally scolded Alex for spilling all the secrets to a mere mortal. No. An Heewon trusted Kang. It's just that the more she knew, the harder it was to make her obey. But maybe the man should be a little softer with her. An Haiwan pondered. Dark-haired belonged to people who easily succumbed to panic and were afraid of almost everything in the world. but at the same time had a keen sense of justice. Yes, you definitely can't scare them. The man leaned his elbows on the railing. After a few seconds, he said in a soft tone that Khan misunderstood him. Everything will be fine with Alex. Jiwon is much stronger than some people think. In addition, the musician gave her cigarettes. They act as a catalyst. The substances contained in them penetrate the brain and provoke active mental activity. So why Jiwon will be able to find his way quickly? An Hee-won turned his gaze to the elevator. The number 36 was displayed on the small screen. The musician said that soon his enemies will arrive here. My trap worked. The man was proud of himself. Khan's eyes widened in surprise. It turns out that the man was not going to give his sister and pet to the clutches of vampires. Jiwon and Alex were just bait. When the number on the elevator screen changed to 45, An Hee-won slung Kang over his shoulder. The dark-haired girl screamed in surprise. The man just smiled at that. He was in a great mood. Now it became obvious that nothing would happen to Alex. And Kang, who adores the little vampire so much, will not be hurt either. An Hee-won expressed his hope that the dark-haired man would do whatever he said. The girl did not answer. She completely ignored the pianist's words. It is difficult to listen to someone when you are hanging at a height of several tens of meters. An Hee-won decided to share his next plan of action with Kang. At first, the man wanted to change the location. The dark-haired woman gladly agreed to this. She was very afraid of heights. The only question is how to get down from the 70th floor. The elevator is busy and there are no stairs here. The dark-haired girl looked at Hee-won. He flashed his eyes and said that they would jump. The girl's blood froze in her veins. Will they jump? This is madness. But the man did not let Khan say a word. He hugged her to him and jumped off the edge of the roof. The dark-haired girl gripped Hee-won's shoulders with her fingers. The man laughed. He was definitely enjoying the day. Suddenly a bullet flew a few centimeters from the dark-haired woman's ear. The girl screamed and buried her nose in Hee-won's neck. The smile disappeared from the man's face for a moment. He realized that he would not be able to avoid a clash with the enemies of the An family. Several more bullets flew past the couple. The man ran his palm over Kang's back. He hoped that the girl was not too scared. Khan was silent. Well, everything's under control then, An Hee-won thought to himself. He put his hand forward and black smoke began to appear from it, which after a moment turned into a gun. The man clamped his hand on the dark-haired woman's waist. Kang understood that there was going to be a shooting now, so she hugged the man tightly by the neck and slightly tilted her head to the side so as not to interfere with the musician's aim. A few seconds passed. Shots were heard. The enemies tried to hit the pianist or Khan, but it was all in vain. The man with the girl in his arms somehow managed to constantly dodge the bullets. Shot from An Hee-won. Someone roared on the roof. It seems that the man hit one of the pursuers. The shot stopped. The enemies decided to leave An Hee-won for a short time. The gun disappeared from the hands of the musician. Khan's mouth dropped open in surprise. With every minute spent with An Hee-won, this man seemed more and more strange to the girl. Suddenly the musician grabbed the canvas of the big board, which they flew past. The fabric could not withstand the weight of the man and his companion and tore. The dark-haired woman yelled at An Hee-won to do something. It wasn't that far to the ground, and they were sure to crash if the man didn't find a way to cushion the fall. Fortunately, the musician was not lost. He waved his hand with the cloth, but it tightened, forming a kind of parachute. Admittedly, An Hee-won's invention didn't really slow down the couple's flight. The dark-haired dared to look down. There was a glass ceiling under them. An Hee-won, the girl called softly. The man looked down and cursed. Things are really bad. Maybe he and Kang won't crash, but they'll definitely get hurt. Suddenly a good idea occurred to the man. He wrapped the cloth around himself and the dark-haired woman. Such an improvised raincoat was supposed to protect the couple from broken glass. A few seconds later, Tila Kang and An Hee-won broke through the ceiling. The pair fell to the floor. The people in the hall stared at the new arrivals. An Hee-won stood up and looked around to see who he would have to deal with now. Khan sat on the floor and muttered something under her breath. Suddenly, several men took out pistols from their holsters at the same time and pointed them at the musician. He sighed. Another shooting? How banal. Are they so stupid that they do not know other methods of neutralizing the enemy? One of the shooters ordered An Hee-won not to move, but the man seemed to ignore his words. He took out a cigarette from his pants pocket and lit it. At that moment, several shots rang out. The musician, with an indifferent expression on his face, snapped his fingers, and the balls turned in the other direction. A moment later, they struck those who released them. The men fell to the floor. An Hee-won nodded. "It's our fault," he said. "You shouldn't have rushed in." Here the man was called by the dark-haired woman, who had already more or less come to her senses. Kang was very angry with An Hee-won for the fact that he got out of the way when he fell. This spectacularity was useless, mused the dark-haired woman. What if we crashed? The man brushed Khan away like an annoying fly. An Hee-won said she was boring. He just wanted their downfall to be like a Tarzan moment. The dark-haired woman opened her eyes wide. She would never have thought that a creature like An Hee-won watched ordinary movies, but less so. Khan was worried about something else. The girl, with a note of indignation in her voice, asked the man what the black smoke was, which suddenly turned into a gun. Hee-won was slightly offended that the dark-haired woman called one of his abilities a strange smoke. If it weren't for this smoke, her body would have already been torn to pieces by vampires and other magical creatures. The dark-haired woman frowned and said that she didn't like the fact that An Hee-won killed people in the hall without any remorse. They are not human, the man reminded Khan. But this did not calm the dark-haired man. She still considered An Hee-won's actions illegal and immoral. By the way, regarding the law. Khan asked the musician if magical creatures were punished for murder. The man's eyes flashed. He was amused by the curiosity of the dark-haired woman. Despite her fear of the new world she was forced into, the girl sought to learn as much information as possible about its inhabitants. The musician was about to make fun of Kang about this, when suddenly, out of nowhere, a huge purple wolf appeared in front of the man and the girl. His yellow eyes burned with an evil fire. The beast growled at An Hee-won, but the man was not at all frightened. Instead, he smiled and raised his hand. The wolf froze in place, changing his mind to attack the pianist. It seems that An Hee-won liked him. The man ran his hand over the animal's thick fur. The dark-haired woman watched this as if enchanted. An Hee-won told her that the purple wolf was a pet of Elder Richter, or someone in his entourage. The man looked into the animal's eyes, and in a firm but calm tone ordered the wolf to bite its master. Kill everyone who will be near him. The musician seems to have conducted a hypnosis session for the animal, and the session is quite successful. The wolf turned its back on An Hee-won and ran away. The dark-haired woman was impressed once again during the evening. One more time. Who will calmly accept a creature that knows how to hypnotize animals and create things from smoke? The dark-haired woman moved a little away from the man and quietly asked who he really was. An Hee-won tilted his head to the side and smiled. Only a creature that can turn dreams into reality. It was another joke from the man. Of course, he had a lot of abilities, but he did not know how to transform people. Only the goddess possessed such a skill. An Hee-won held out his hand to the dark-haired man. They had to hurry. We have to return the gem of greed, said the man. The dark-haired woman stood up and asked An Hee-won if he sometimes talks about Alex's heart. The musician was confused for a moment. He asked the girl how much she knew. Khan lowered her head and replied that she had heard that the boy's heart contained something extremely valuable. Something that will help revive Gulbaha. And when Alex grows up, An Hee-won will cut out his heart to get the treasure hidden inside. The man snorted and said that little Richter was wrong. He is not going to destroy his heart. The girl opened her eyes wide. What? An Hee-won didn't answer that. He turned his back to the girl and went to the exit of the hall. The girl asked him to tell her everything, but the man did not even look back. The dark-haired girl had no choice but to run after the musician. The girl managed to catch up with An Hee-won. She asked the man why he was using Alex as a vessel to store a part of his friend. The man sighed. He realized that he would have to tell everything to the dark-haired woman, otherwise she would not leave him. An Hee-won said that Alex's body was the perfect size for Gulbaha's tiny heart. The man began to explain to the girl that every magical creature has a vulnerable organ. Vampires have a heart. Gulbaha's heart was cut into 10 pieces. The dark-haired woman asked who treated the vampire so cruelly. An Hee-won replied that it was the work of the goddess that Gulbaha worshipped. It was she who killed the fair-haired vampire. The reasons why the goddess did this to her devotee were not known. Someone said that she was in love with Gulbacha and killed the vampire because she couldn't be with him. Some claimed that the goddess thus punished Gulbacha for his greed and lust for power, but all these are just rumors that should not be trusted. A man and a dark-haired man entered the elevator. The girl wanted to ask An Hee-won something else about Gulbacha, but the pianist stopped her. That's all you can know. The other is too important. He pressed the up button. In any case, the musician was going to bring his friend back to life, so he collected Gulbacha's heart piece by piece. But An Hee-won couldn't find all the pieces of the vampire's heart. What An Hee-won managed to collect was smaller than the heart of a 2-year-old child. The pianist began looking for a body that could hold a tiny heart, and that body became Alex Richter. Wait! A puzzle gradually formed in the dark-haired woman's head. So you took out the boy's native heart and planted the remains of Gulbach's organ? The man reluctantly answered that it is possible to say so. The dark-haired woman activated her blind justice mode again. She screamed at An Haiwan, trying to understand how he could take away a small child's heart. This is not even cruelty, but some kind of savagery. The man laughed. The dark-haired girl sarcastically asked what had amused him so much, but received no answer. An Haiwan got out of the elevator. The girl hurried after him. Suddenly, something flew past her head and fell to the floor. The musician took a closer look and said that the strange object was a ball. The musician began to examine the body of the dark-haired woman for any injuries. The man moved away from the dark-haired woman, making sure that everything was fine with her. Suddenly, pistols were pointed at the couple again. An Haiwan stopped smoking, instead focusing on examining the attackers. They were vampires, apparently sent by Elder Richter. An Haiwan snapped his fingers, and the bullets the ghouls had already fired from their pistols changed direction and hit the attackers. The musician turned his head towards the dark-haired woman and said in a calm tone that they could now safely go to one of the rooms. The man's gaze seemed somehow strange to the dark-haired man, somehow empty and glassy, although on the other hand, none of the magical beings Khan had met were particularly emotional, except for Alexa. But he was still a child. The dark-haired woman asked the man where the rest of the vampires were. He replied that the monsters were most likely from An Haiwan. The man went to the door and pressed the handle. A rather interesting picture appeared in front of the dark-haired woman and An Haiwan. The musician's sister was sitting on the table in the middle of the dark room. As usual, she was smoking a cigarette, and all would have been nothing, if not for several men lying on the floor and begging for mercy. An Haiwan noticed her brother, and her expression changed from calm to angry. "You're late," she exclaimed. The artist was unhappy that she had to fight a bunch of vampires on her own, but the man did not pay attention to her indignation. Instead, he asked his sister where Alex and the Elder Richter were. The woman said that the little one is on the veranda, and everything is fine with him. There was only a slight fright, but his uncle feels much worse. More precisely, felt. An Haiwan killed him. She did this so that he would finally leave the An family alone and let them have some normal fun. "Let's go to a party." The artist was already tired of sitting in this room. She wanted to dance and drink expensive alcohol, but An Haiwan was in no hurry to leave the room. He calmly said that An Haiwan was wrong. The woman arched an eyebrow. The artist did not understand what her brother meant. The musician explained to the woman that she had let the Elder Richter in. The artist was even more surprised. How could she let a vampire in if he was here, lying on the floor at her feet? The woman looked closely at the corpse's face and realized that An Haiwan was right. The dead vampire did have similar features to Richter, but was younger than him. An Haiwan didn't pay attention to this when she killed him. The musician told his sister that she had been tricked like a naive little girl. An Haiwan listened to all the accusations in silence, but it was clear that in a moment she would answer Haiwan just as rudely. The atmosphere was becoming tense. The dark-haired woman wanted to leave the room. An Haiwan seemed to read Kang's mind and said that she can come out if she wants to. Still, she is not obliged to observe family quarrels. The girl sighed with relief. This was almost the first time she was truly grateful to An Haiwan. Khan hurried to leave the room. The man closed the door behind her, and Haiwan angrily asked her brother what he was up to. The man replied that a woman should not be so angry. He only pointed out her mistake. But next time the artist will pay attention to small details. The woman sighed. She loved her brother, but sometimes he behaved simply intolerably. He taught her like a small child. An Haiwan decided to change the subject and asked the musician if he was going to look for the Elder Richter. The man himself did not know the answer to this question. He thought that the blonde vampire ran away in disgrace because he wanted to avoid a fight. And this approach to things impressed the musician. He himself did not like to let go without a reason. And besides, it is not a fact that the Elder Richter left the building. He can be anywhere, in the closet, behind the wall, and even on the veranda together with Alex. The musician pointed a finger at the boy. He shuddered. Through the glass, the little boy could perfectly hear An Haiwan's conversation with An Haiwan. The boy was frightened by the words of the pianist about the possible presence of the Elder Richter in the room. Alex hurried to leave the veranda, but he shouldn't have done that. Giant claws pierced the wall and closed around the little one. "Alex!" the woman shouted. She was about to rush towards the boy, but An Haiwan told her to stay put. She will not help the boy now. She will only suffer. A vampire hissed, Tears appeared in Alex's eyes. The boy asked An Haiwan to save him. The man ignored the boy's words. It sounds strange, but he had more important things to do right now. He had to understand what the elder Richter wanted. The pianist decided not to drag and directly asked the fair-haired man about it. Richter broke into a maniacal smile. He enjoyed the power he had over his nephew and members of An's family. The blonde said that An Haiwan had better give the stone away before Alex's heart was damaged. The musician asked the elder Richter why he was waiting for his arrival. The vampire flashed his eyes. What else was left for me to do? The stone around Alex's neck could be a fake. The blonde didn't trust An Haiwan, a being who even hid his name. In fact, the dark-haired man's name was Lucius Effendel. That is how the vampire addressed the man. The elder Richter thought that in this way he could anger the musician, but he remained unmoved. He put out his cigarette and said that this time the blonde vampire was wrong. The stone around Alex's neck was real. The precious, as if to confirm this, lit up in a bright red color. Elder Richter clawed at the stone. An Haiwan asked her brother what they were going to do. If they don't give the stone, Alex will die. An Haiwan noted that the vampire would try to kill the kid anyway. While the musician and the artist consulted, the elder Richter cut the chain around his nephew's neck with his claws and disappeared. The little fell on the floor. He was bleeding. But An Haiwan did nothing. It seems that the wound was not very serious. An Haiwan ran to the exit of the room and suddenly opened the door. There was no one in the corridor. The woman cursed in her mind. Damn vampire. He loved causing them trouble so much. Suddenly the artist froze in place. She remembered Khan. The girl who left the room shortly before the elder Richter attacked Alex has disappeared. An Haiwan approached his sister and told her not to worry. He managed to hide the bug in Khan's dress so they would be able to control the situation. The man asked An Haiwan to cure Alex. He himself was going to see the location of Richter and Khan. The musician took out his phone from his pants pocket and opened the tracking program. The dark-haired man and the vampire were not far from An Haiwan and An Haiwan. The man clenched his hand into a fist and told his sister that he would go after the elder Richter. Not only vampires, but also other magical creatures encroached on the stone. An Haiwan wanted to gather all the enemies in one place to remind them who he was. The man waved his hand, and a dark smoke enveloped him. A moment later, a tall man with flowing long hair and purple eyes stood in front of An Haiwan. Despite the late hour, the streets of New York were bustling with life. People were going everywhere in their cars. Some hurried home to their relatives. Others hoped to have a good time in a nightclub. Busy with their worries, the townspeople did not notice what was happening right under their noses. A black silhouette whistled over one of the buildings. He landed on the roof of some skyscraper. That silhouette was the elder Richter. The man was holding Kang on his shoulders, who was quietly crying out of fear. Surprisingly, her whining didn't annoy the blonde. He didn't even try to silence the dark-haired man. Perhaps the man was very good at abstracting himself from everything. Or the vampire was focused on something very important, so he didn't just not notice that Khan was crying. He didn't even see the bright bug on the girl's dress. The man threw Khan onto the hard surface of the roof. The dark-haired girl hit her back painfully, but said nothing. The vampire roughly grabbed the girl by the shoulders and abruptly lifted her up. He growled at Khan to keep her from moving and took out a jewel from his pocket. The fair-haired man looked at him for several seconds. The man was glad that he managed to get what he had been hunting for years. But before running away with the precious stone, he had to make sure it wasn't fake. For this, he needed dark hair. With the help of the girl, the man wanted to check whether the stone worked. You will ask why he kidnapped an ordinary mortal and not some magical creature. But the fact is that a real jewel only works on people. The man bent down to the dark-haired woman's face and ordered her to tell him how to use the stone. Khan answered through tears that she didn't know anything, but the blonde didn't believe her. He was sure that An Haiwan had told the dark-haired woman everything he could about this jewel, and little Alex had to tell the girl something. The dark-haired one said that was not true. The blonde stared at her with a murderous gaze for a few seconds, but Kang didn't utter another word. The man realized that apparently she was not lying. He pulled away from her and clenched his teeth in rage. That's why, when everything seems to be going according to plan, something happens that destroys all expectations. The blonde pulled the girl by the hand. "Get up." Khan did not dare to listen, because she was perfectly aware that her rebellion was useless now. You shouldn't play with someone who can kill you at any moment, right? The man took the dark-haired man in his arms and jumped off the roof. The girl noticed something in the sky and cried out. For some reason, the blonde reacted to this sound. He must have realized that Khan's words should not be taken lightly. She just can't lie. The man looked up at the sky. A creature with wings was rapidly approaching them from Khan. It was a fairy. The vampire swung his leg in the air and rushed forward. Khan gripped his back tightly with her nails to keep from falling. Although she was afraid of the blonde, the prospect of crashing to death scared her more. Meanwhile, the man was muttering something about fairies in displeasure. Their appearance meant that the magical beings already knew about the theft of the stone. So, now demons, werewolves, and other clans will hunt the fair-haired one. The creatures in the sky increased noticeably. Kang realized that she had to do something. Otherwise, one of these powerful magical creatures would definitely kill her. To prevent this from happening, you must first persuade the elder Richter to give her the stone. The girl told the man that she wanted to help him. Maybe she can figure out how the stone works. The vampire gritted his teeth, but still landed on the roof of the house. The man took out a stone and placed it in Khan's palm. A light of hope flashed in the girl's eyes. Well, the fair-haired man listened to her, which means that there is still a chance to be saved. Kang, of course, hoped that An Hewan would help her, but the musician was still missing. The girl was frantically thinking about what to do with the stone when she felt the flowing heat on her palms. The jewel began to melt. A strange but familiar feeling spread through the dark-haired woman's veins. Ecstasy. Then Khan finally understood what was going on. The jewel that once belonged to a vampire contained an ecstasy that only human skin could release. The dark-haired woman noticed that the vampire's eyes were bloodshot. He wanted to eat Khan. The girl looked down. There on the ground was a pool. Khan put the stone to her mouth, swallowed the jewel, and walked to the edge of the roof. A moment later, the dark-haired woman jumped up. The chest is unbearably hard. Khan covered her mouth with her hands. Although the girl was in pain, she did not regret swallowing the stone. So the elder Richter will not be able to harm Alex. The dark-haired woman did not understand only one thing: how she had the courage to jump from a height of several tens of meters. And it doesn't matter that there is a swimming pool below. Falling into water can be quite traumatic if you fall in the wrong way. The girl mentally scolded herself for not regrouping before the jump. Khan thought that she would most likely die, although this is not the worst option, if compared to what the elder Richter could do with the dark-haired woman. Suddenly, Kang felt someone's hands on her back. "Well done for taking care of the stone," said a soft voice. "But don't jump anymore. I'm not likely to catch you next time." The girl opened her mouth. An Haiwan. He saved her. The dark-haired woman sighed with relief and buried her nose in the man's neck. The musician was confused for a moment. He didn't expect the dark-haired man to react like this to his appearance. "Does she feel safe around me?" the man asked himself. The dark-haired girl turned her gaze to her savior. Only now did she notice how he had changed. Long hair, a fancy costume, and most importantly, eyes. They became bright purple but did not lose their magnetism. An Hewan smiled. "Our Miss Kang doesn't think about the consequences of her actions at all?" A moment later, the man and the girl fell into the pool. The dark-haired woman frowned and held her breath. An Haiwan pulled Kang up. With the help of magic, the musician managed to push himself and Khan to the surface of the water. The same magic threw the pair onto land, where several vampires stood in dark cloaks with hoods. One of them addressed the man, "Lucius Effendel." Khan stared at the musician in surprise. She knew about An Haiwan's phenomenal abilities, but she couldn't think that he had another person, Lucius Effendel. The girl noted that it suits the other An Haiwan quite well. The man flashed his eyes and said that he had not used to his role for a long time. The musician clicked his fingers, and the water in the pool rose up. An Haiwan demonstrated his power to the creatures, but it did not scare them at all. The vampires raised their hands up and, having uttered several spells, created white circles in the air that merged into one. Flash, and a creature with a sword appeared above the ground. She ran over to An Haiwan and Kang. The musician arched an eyebrow and broke the creature's sword with a wave of his hand. She hissed and began to melt. It seems that all her power was locked in the weapon. The musician asked Khan to step back so that the particles left by the monster would not get on her skin. For a mere mortal, such contact could be dangerous. An Haiwan snapped his fingers again. The drops of water from the pool turned into stones, which the dark-haired man pointed at the vampires and asked if they were ready to risk their own lives for the sake of the stone. They don't own the jewel anyway, so they won't be able to use it. But the vampires did not retreat. An Haiwan lifted the stones up and deflected his power away from him. Small stones flew right at the vampires. Monsters fell to the ground. Some of them died from wounds inflicted by stones. Some died only from fright. The musician jumped up and magically changed his appearance. The dark-haired girl finally saw her usual An Haiwan, a man with short dark hair, golden eyes, and of course a cigarette clenched between thin fingers. Lucius! One of the vampires dared to address the musician even after what he had done to her allies. The vampire said that An Haiwan's struggle for the stone is futile. The musician will not be able to use the stone either. An Haiwan said that a vampire can't get away with it. But the hooded stranger did not pay attention to these words. He was not one of the scary ones. The creature asked what An Haiwan was going to do after Gulbaha woke up. The man took a deep breath and replied in a disdainful tone that he was not going to report to the clan head's assistant. The vampire hissed menacingly. An Haiwan just smiled at that. Weren't you taught to be grateful, Eraser, and to back down when given the chance? The cigarette in the man's fingers began to smolder. An Haiwan would like Eraser and his henchmen to get out of here. The head vampire nodded his head, realizing that the musician was not kidding. After a moment, the monsters disappeared, leaving behind only black smoke. An Haiwan looked at Kang and gave her an encouraging smile. Everything is more or less normal now. The only thing to worry about now is the stone. Where is he? The girl lowered her head. The dark-haired woman decided to ask the man a question about the jewel, to gently lead him to what had happened. She wondered if a person was really needed for the stone to work. An Haiwan said in a calm tone that it was. If a person moves away from the stone, it becomes an ordinary mineral again. The girl looked away from the musician. She still hadn't thought of another question to ask An Haiwan. The man noticed the panic on the dark-haired woman's face and looked into her eyes. He asked the girl where the stone was. The dark-haired woman realized that there was no point in lying or avoiding the question. An Haiwan will find out about everything anyway. The girl closed her eyes and said out loud that she had swallowed a stone. The musician froze in place. He did not expect this. The dark-haired woman began to excuse herself. In a trembling voice, she explained to her husband that she had done this with the stone because she did not know whether they would come to her aid. It was the only way to keep Alex safe. The man was silent. The dark-haired girl looked down at the floor and quietly asked if An Haiwan could get the stone out of her. The musician put his hand to his forehead and sighed. Although he was not human, he was still tired of constant problems. Obsession of vampires and other magical creatures with the stone, attempts to revive Gulbaka. All this was exhausting An Haiwan little by little. And then there's Khan, who doesn't yet know how to deal with magical creatures. The man looked at Khan and said that she really didn't think about the consequences. The dark-haired woman opened her eyes wide. A nervous smile appeared on her face. Something told the girl that An Haiwan said about the consequences for a reason. It seems that a stone cannot be removed from a person. Born in the dark, those who left their cold bodies in search of pleasure, they received new roles, and with them immortality and deep sadness. Their progenitor is Lilith, the one whom Adam drove out. It was Lilith who gave birth to magical creatures, and then scattered them around the world. Particles of the goddess's darkness created ecstasy in everyone's thoughts. Ward of the city hospital. Kang was sitting on the hospital bed and clutching her throat with her fingers. It still stung a little, even though it had been 10 hours since Khan had swallowed the rock. An Haiwan, who had recently entered the ward, said that according to the examination, the dark-haired woman was healthy. The doctors did not find any abnormalities. Khan looked at her husband. She was surprised. Did the stone not affect her body in any way? This cannot be. An Haiwan confirmed the girl's doubts. He lit a cigarette. You have lost the opportunity to live as an ordinary person. The man explained to Khan that her blood had a stronger smell because of the stone. That is why the girl should stay away from Alex, at least in the near future. The girl was upset by the musician's words. During the month spent with An Haiwan's family, she got used to little Richter. He always supported and encouraged Khan, and to the boy's credit, he never abused her blood. He drank only as much as he needed. On the other hand, Khan didn't hold out much hope that Alex would stay that way. Maybe with age he will become like the other vampires the dark-haired woman has seen. Yes, character also affects a person's behavior, but who knows the nature of ghouls? Khan looked down. She did not want to lose her beloved Alex. An Haiwan told the dark-haired woman that she should prepare herself mentally. To break up with Alex? Asked the girl. The man laughed hoarsely. He didn't mean that at all. Separation from Alex is a small thing compared to what awaits her. Dark hair can die, and that's at best. The dark-haired woman wondered what the worst-case scenario was. The musician did not answer. Kang was not surprised by this. An Haiwan always gave her some information selectively. The girl took a sip of water. An Haiwan noted that the dark-haired man somehow drinks a lot, but she said that she felt heat in her body. But I usually manage to cool down with a glass or two. Khan looked at the floor. Weird. Han Hee-won raised a cigarette to his lips and told Kang that the source of the heat coursing through her veins was a stone. It is because of him that the dark-haired man cannot get drunk. Even a tub of water will not be enough for her. The girl asked why this stone felt hot. An Hye-won calmly said that each of the 7 types of Lilith stones has its own characteristic and conventionally denotes a certain organ. The jewel that Khan swallowed is a heart. Unfortunately, it will not give the dark-haired girl any extraordinary abilities. She will simply become more active. How useless! The man's tone was bored. Dark-haired asked what other stones there were and what they meant. Alex had told her once about the jewels of the goddess, but only in general terms. Kang was sure that An Hye-won knew more. The man raised his index finger. Are you starting to bombard me with questions already, Miss Kang? It's so in your style. Despite this sarcastic remark, the musician was not going to hide information about the stones. After all, Khan, who has one of the jewels inside, deserves to know about it. The stones symbolize the 7 elements: water, fire, air, earth, light, shadow, and soul. Real fragments of Lilith, the Queen of Darkness, are locked in the minerals. However, because the goddess was too strong, the stone was first destroyed. Anyway, the stone Khan swallowed is Lilith's heart. The girl bit her nail. It wasn't until An Hye-won's words that Kang realized how she had gotten stuck. Just to think, the dark-haired girl swallowed a real heart. But it's not easy either. Carrying the organ of the goddess of darkness is strange and very dangerous. Khan took a sip of water. Yes, now she needs to calm down a little, although it is difficult. An Hee-won flashed his eyes and said that he needed to find a way to extract the stone from the dark-haired woman's body as soon as possible. The man tried not to show Khan his concern. You should not make the girl even more nervous. Kang poured some water into her glass and asked the musician if similar incidents had happened before. That would simplify the situation. The man replied that he had not seen anything like it in the last 100 years. Maybe someone did something as stupid as Khan in ancient times, but it won't be easy to find out. It is necessary to raise the archives and search for old documents. Maybe An Hye-won and Kang will be able to find research on this topic, and if not, then the rumors will agree. But first you need to help Khan deal with the heat. This can be done with water. Dark-haired is lucky that An Hye-won is the master of this element. The girl thanked the musician. He smiled slyly and said that he did not need these words. What does this mean? Khan tensed. Does An Hye-won not like to be thanked? But no, that's not the point. The man was still annoyed that Khan had swallowed the stone he had protected for 100 years. If the mineral is out of balance, An Hye-won's plans will fall apart, and this will lead to terrible consequences. Khan doesn't need to know all the details, but she will have to take some responsibility. The musician directed a serious look at the girl. The dark-haired woman timidly asked what kind of responsibility she was talking about. You will wake up Gulbaha. The musician waved his hand with a cigarette. Yes, the vampire will be inferior because of the small heart, but as it is. An Hye-won doesn't have time to fully assemble this vital organ for vampires, and a small heart can fully perform its functions. The musician was sure of it. Desperation appeared in the dark-haired woman's eyes. She didn't really want to wake up the crazy priest lurking in the heart of her pet Alex. But the girl could not deny An Hye-won. First, because then he will not relieve her suffering from the stone. Khan will simply die of thirst. And secondly, it won't cost the man anything to make Khan do what he needs. And the methods that An Hye-won will use to achieve his goal might not be to Kang's liking. The man left the room. Kang looked down and noticed the musician's disc on the floor. The autograph disc that An Hye-won gave to Kang at the exhibition. The girl took the thing in her hands. Perhaps at least a part of the man the dark-haired woman knew remained in this disc. Not at first a priest who used a child to revive his friend, but a talented pianist with a soft look and a unique playing style. Khan inserted the disc into the player. Music flowed from the device. She covered her dark hair with a wave. The girl put her hand to her heart. She felt better. The heat receded. Khan's eyes widened. Does An Hye-won's music have miraculous properties? But Khan's relief was momentary. The girl felt thirsty again. It seems the melody isn't enough to put the girl out of her misery. The dark-haired woman needed to hear the pianist play live. The concert. It was he who could satisfy Khan's need. The next morning, the girl was on the phone with An Ji-won. Khan asked to tell the pianist that she would come to his concert. The woman didn't mind and said that An Hye-won probably wouldn't mind either. True, the musician's sister will not be able to go with Kang, so the girl will have to enjoy the company of someone else. An Ji-won refused to let her go alone. Khan promised the woman that she would not leave the house alone and hung up. And Ji-wona reminded the dark-haired one of her fair-haired friend. They both took care of the girl too much. True, for different reasons. The blonde did it because she loved her friend, and An Ji-won. Apparently the woman, like other magical creatures, considered the dark-haired container with a valuable mineral. Khan lowered her head. These thoughts made the girl sad, but it was not possible to suffer for a long time in Kaen due to lack of time. The girl started going to the theater. She wanted to please the pianist, although she herself did not know why. He's still a soulless log. A few hours later, Khan, dressed in a white dress with a coat of the same color over it, stood in the middle of the concert hall. The girl looked for her place with her eyes. To Kang's surprise, she was to sit in the front row. Tickets for seats near the stage were very expensive, so the girl never bought them. Such are the privileges of An Hee-won's service. The girl sat down in one of the soft red chairs. The concert was supposed to start in 5 minutes. The dark-haired woman was looking forward to it. She really wanted to ease the effect of the stone. Kang took out a bottle of water from her bag and was about to take a sip when her phone vibrated. The girl glanced at the screen. Message from an unknown number. He addressed the dark-haired woman by name. For some reason, Kang thought that this mysterious stranger was An Hee-won. The dark-haired girl asked the number about it, and he confirmed her guess. The girl turned off the phone because the rules required it. She decided to ask An Hee-won about everything after the concert was over. About a minute later, the man came on stage. He bowed to the audience and held his gaze on Khan for a moment. The girl's heart stopped. How handsome he was. A white shirt with a cream tie, a black jacket and trousers of the same color. Kang immediately remembered the day she saw An Hee-won for the first time. Despite the fact that she learned about this man, he did not lose his attractiveness. The musician sat down at the piano, moved his shoulders to relax a little, and hit the keys with his fingers. A few days ago, the hospital ward of Khan. The dark-haired woman asked the man why he was waking up Gulbach. Yes, this vampire was a friend at first, but he is a crazy monster. The man put his hand to his chin. Gulbaha, although dangerous, is a very strong vampire. If the balance is disturbed, An Hee-won might need the help of a priest. The girl asked what kind of balance we were talking about. The man lit a cigarette and sighed. It is not so easy to explain the meaning of all Lilith stones in the community of magical beings, but it must be done. When several seals are connected to each other, the musician began, and one of them is destroyed, the rest will also suffer. The disappearance of the stones will lead to disaster. The dark-haired woman nodded her head. The man smiled and said that Khan shouldn't worry about it now. She only has to fulfill her obligations, that's all. An Hee-won will handle the rest of the problems himself. And if suddenly the musician needs something else from the dark-haired woman, he will come to her. Until then, Khan is better off staying at home. She will be safe there. The man walked out of the ward and before closing the door, gave Kang a sympathetic look. Maybe your task seems impossible to you, but you can do it. Concert hall. Kang sat and listened as if enchanted to An Hee-won's incredible playing. Yes, a live performance can never compare to recordings, no matter how good they are. Suddenly the melody stopped. Intermission. The girl took out her phone from her bag and opened a chat with An Hee-won. The man asked Khan to go up to the 3rd floor of the neighboring building and enter the far corridor. The girl was supposed to meet her husband right now. Khan almost choked with indignation. The dark-haired woman knew An Hee-won's essence, but his self-centeredness still surprised her. But what will you do? This is him, one of the most talented musicians in Korea, and a priest first. The girl went to another building, went up to the 3rd floor and opened the door to the corridor. Khan involuntarily shuddered when she heard the soft ringing of her own phone. An unknown number flashed on the screen. The girl picked up the phone thinking it was An Hee-won. So it turned out. The man asked the dark-haired woman where she was in a slightly irritated tone. He was tired of waiting. Tired of waiting? Khan was surprised. He himself made an appointment for her in a nearby building. The girl moved the phone away from her ear and opened the chat with An Hee-won again to quote the man the message he had written to her at the beginning of the intermission. Just in case, the girl looked at the number, and it didn't match the one An Hee-won called her from. The girl trembled. It turns out that someone lured her into a trap. The real An Hee-won asked for her location a second time. Kang decided to tell him about the message from the stranger. Suddenly, the dark-haired woman heard some strange sounds from the depths of the corridor. And after a moment, she saw red dust. Khan froze in place. Fear paralyzed her body. An Hee-won was saying something into the receiver, but the girl could no longer hear. The man understood that she was in trouble, in very big trouble. The musician called his secretary and asked him to cancel the concert. An Hee-won had to save Kang. The musician once again tried to reach the dark-haired woman. He repeated her name several times, loud and slow, and it worked. Khan finally heard him. The girl asked what she should do. The musician told her to leave the building. Enemies could be lurking in the corridor. The dark-haired girl hastened to exit the corridor, but did not have time to approach the door. A bright blue glow cut through Khan's arm and sent the girl back against the wall. The dark-haired woman sat down on the floor. Blood flowed from the wound, but the girl ignored it. She looked around to see where she was being attacked from, but because of the complete darkness, Kang could not see anything. The girl's heart began to beat faster. "Yes, we need to get together." The girl tried to calm down. She got up and ran towards the exit. Escape was her only chance to save herself. A defenseless person would not be able to repel the attacks of monsters. The girl was thrown back against the wall. A blue glow followed her. Khan screamed. She didn't have the strength to run. The dark-haired woman's dress was stained with blood. The girl was almost sickened by this. Suddenly, Kang heard a crash from above. Someone tried to break through the ceiling. A moment, and someone's hand with black claws, casting a gray-blue light, hit the floor. The dark-haired woman reared her head, not taking her eyes off the part of the monster's body. The girl tried to move very slowly and quietly so as not to provoke the hand. Khan managed to reach the door without injury. The girl carefully opened them and saw another corridor. "What the hell?" Khan said in her mind. "He wasn't here." The dark-haired woman thought that this was another trap. Meanwhile, a giant paw approached the dark-haired one. The girl decided to run down the second corridor. But as soon as she crossed the threshold, the space around changed. Tables, office chairs, shelves. The corridor turned into something similar to an office. Khan squeezed her injured hand. No matter how hard they try to trick the girl, there must be a way out of this strange room. She saw another door and opened it. Red room. Khan went inside. A hand appeared in the middle of the room. Khan took a step back and cursed herself. This Pochara knew how to appear silently, which made it difficult for Khan to get out of here. A hand reached out to the dark-haired woman. At the same time, a part of the body radiated some kind of power that stung Khan. The girl closed her eyes. A searing pain coursed through her veins. Panic covered the dark-haired man, like when Richter stole her from the party. The only difference is that An Hee-won was able to track Kang's location that night. A hand shot towards the girl. She pressed her whole body against the wall. A moment later, small fragments of some material stuck into the dark-haired man. Khan lost consciousness. Her body somehow fell through the wall. "Grandpa, open your eyes!" The dark-haired woman came to her senses on the cold blue floor. The girl looked up and saw a tall, fair-haired woman in a black mini-dress in front of her. It was An Ji-won. She, like her brother, had two roles, and the second suited her more. The woman with thick, wavy gray hair and pink eyes looked more like An Ji-won than a shy artist. Khan wanted to say something but didn't have time. A giant hand appeared above the women's heads. "Back!" the fair-haired Kang shouted. Pieces of the ceiling fell on the dark-haired and An Ji-won. With the help of her strength, the blonde pressed her hand to the floor. The woman bit her finger and told the dark-haired man that she was unlikely to be able to lead them out of the maze. It blocked some of her abilities. The only thing An Ji-won can do is to buy some time with arm wrestling. Part of the monster's body had already regained consciousness and was approaching the fair-haired woman with the intention of avenging her insult. An Ji-won tensed her muscles, waved her hand and rose up, enveloping herself in a purple-pink glow. The woman hovered in the air to take aim. After a moment, the blonde jumped straight onto the hand. Ta started to fling herself from side to side, trying to throw An Ji-won off her. But the woman kept her balance damn well. An Ji-won threw Kang to run away. But the dark-haired woman was in no hurry to obey the woman's order. The girl felt too weak to run. The wounded hand trembled. The dark-haired woman sat down on the floor. An Ji-won didn't say anything to Kang. The woman was busy fighting with her hand. Suddenly bats appeared in the room. Khan cried out. She was afraid of these animals. But it seems they had no intention of harming the dark-haired, or An Ji-won in any way. The bats were only guides for the vampire who descended into the room. A boy dressed in a red cloak. Alex Richter. The little one ran to Khan as soon as his boots touched the floor. He gave the dark-haired woman his hand and said that he missed her. The smile of the fair-haired boy warmed the girl. She even forgot about An Hee-won's warning about Alex. The boy asked the dark-haired girl if she was very scared. Trivia. Khan smiled weakly. The little one flashed his eyes and said that now she had nothing to worry about, because vampires are known in labyrinths. They navigate similar traps like fish in water. The fair-haired man grabbed the girl by the hand and dragged her to the exit of the room. They had to hurry so as not to get hurt by a hefty hand. The brunette noticed that Alex didn't pay attention to her blood. Could he really control himself so well at such a young age? The blonde turned to the girl and smiled. I was worried when I came here, all because of the weak power inside me. Khan understood that the reason for Alex's normal behavior was the weakening of the stone's effect on the blood. The girl asked the fair-haired man if everything would be fine with An Ji-won. Perhaps it is better for them to take the woman with them. Alex said not to worry so much. The huge hand that targeted Khan was a prank of the Arcadia, and An Hai-won's sister is a pro at dealing with these creatures. The boy and the girl left the room. Khan asked why Arcadia attacked her. Alex explained that they harbored a grudge against Gulbak. When the Arcadians realized that the stone would not be theirs, they decided to destroy it, all in order to prevent the revival of Gulbaka. The dark-haired woman wondered what kind of grudge the Arcadians had against the vampire priest. Alex did not know the details, because this story is very old. But An Hai-won briefly told the little boy about the relationship between Arcadia and Gulbaka. The latter killed Abeltuid Erphagos, head of the Arcadians. No one ever found out about the reasons for such cruelty. Khan pursed her lips. The more she learned about the head of vampires, the more disgusted he became. His bloodthirstiness knew no bounds. Was killing his father not enough for Gulbahar? Why did the priest go so far? Maybe he wanted more power. Perhaps he was blinded by a sick, fanatical love for the goddess he worshipped. Who knows? If An Hai-won knew the reasons behind Gulbaha's cruelty, he still wouldn't have told Kang about them. A sharp pain in his injured arm pulled the dark-haired man out of his thoughts. Alex tugged too hard on the girl's palm. The kid immediately apologized for this and told Khan that she would have to suffer. In addition to advancing through the maze, Alex needs to destroy it. It doesn't take very long, but it still slows down their release. The dark-haired woman hastened to reassure the boy. It's okay, Alex, I'm fine. Only that was not true. Khan felt sick. It seems that the stone reacted to her conversation with little Richter about Gulbacha. Meanwhile, Alex led the girl to one of the doors. Dark-haired and Alex almost got out, but in order to go to another room, it was necessary to perform a small ritual. The boy touched the doorknob, and it cut his palm in some strange way. The child clenched his teeth in pain. The girl wanted to approach Alex and ask if he needed help, but the boy wouldn't even let her get close to him. Mortals cannot interfere with rituals. Ancient magic can just kill people. A dazzling yellow glow appeared around Alex. With a wave of his hand, the boy drew a circle on the floor. Something began to rattle at the door. Alex surrounded himself with yellow crystals. Suddenly, a purple glow emerged from behind the closed door. Khan shouted for Alex to be careful. The glow was followed by a spike that pierced Alex. The boy grimaced and grunted so that the dark-haired woman wouldn't worry about him, and under no circumstances come too close. Alex directed a yellow glow from his hands at the spike. He moved back, but that was not the end. The magic threw Alex against the wall. It hurt Khan to watch, but she didn't move. The girl understood. If the fair-haired man says that intervention is unnecessary, then it is so. Alex's eyes closed, and a fountain of blood spewed from his mouth. The child's body fell to the floor. His chest and neck were bloody. Alex didn't move. He looked like a rag doll, a fragile and weak-willed doll. Khan's eyes widened. A scream escaped from her throat. It seemed to the girl that this was the end. Alex didn't move, and this worried Khan very much. Is he really dead? Blood covered the floor. The dark-haired girl ran up to the boy and knelt down. The girl pressed Alex's body to her and felt the pulse on his neck with her fingers. Live, Khan breathed out. Now everything depended only on the dark-haired woman. She had to take Alex in her arms and run away from there. The girl felt a duty to the fair-haired man. He needed to be brought to An Hai-won as soon as possible. But the dark-haired woman did not know how to do it. Her injured, batter-like arm would not have been able to withstand any strain. While Kang was thinking about how to save the child, the door in front of her opened. A man in a white shirt with horns on his head came out. His bright red eyes burned with an evil fire. A man was talking to someone using something that looked like a walkie-talkie. Two huge black wings protruded from his back. The stranger approached Khan, glanced at Alex and smiled. In his argument, he said that destroying the Lilith stone no longer makes sense. The girl's hands trembled. Is Alex dead? She asked herself in her mind. Suddenly, Kang heard someone's voice coming from nowhere. You have to say my name. The dark-haired woman opened her eyes wide. She did not understand who was talking to her and why. Is she able to do something in such a situation? But the voice did not subside. He said there was no time to hesitate. If Khan doesn't do it now, the horned creature will kill her and Alex. The dark-haired woman took a deep breath and said loudly, Gulbacha. She wasn't sure it would work because Gulbacha wasn't a vampire's full name. Fortunately, Khan was wrong. A half-naked man with long blonde hair to his knees emerged from Alex's body. Khan closed her eyes. The girl was frightened by the fact that she called the priest. She is a simple person who had no relation to magic, until recently. Gulbaha took a step forward and spoke, a withered flower that came to life after spilled blood, as red as ecstasy. The vampire moved his hands and streaks of blood appeared on the floor. The horned creatures, of which there were already several, were trapped by the large translucent orbs. Khan finally dared to open her eyes. Gulbacha looked at her and smiled, but not evil, as towards one's enemies, but somehow calmly, even encouragingly. The corner of Khan's mouth turned up involuntarily. The vampire king was not as scary as she imagined. The priest turned to the horned creatures. The man flashed his eyes and said that he, Gulbaha Aziz Shahar, would take their lives today. It was clear from his voice that he was not kidding. After a moment, the priest rushed at the enemies and began to suck the blood from each of them. He did it so fast that the creatures didn't even have time to scream. Khan covered her mouth with her hand. The girl was trembling again. The dark-haired woman could not watch the scenes of violence, even if those who tried to kill her were dealt with. Khan quietly asked Gulbaha to stop. The vampire looked back at the dark-haired man and absorbed all the blood in himself. At the same time, his face became younger. It seems that the blood served for the priest not only as food, but also as a rejuvenating potion. The man headed towards Kang. "You freed me, but you're still afraid." A century ago, a man dressed in a long red cloak with a hood was wandering through the desert. Gulbacha was a strange traveler. He was trying to find something that would help him win over Lilith. The vampire was possessed by the supreme goddess, as well as the power he could get by becoming the husband, or at least the partner of the red-haired Lilith. Gulbaha spent more than one day in the desert looking for what he needed, but it did not lead to anything. The blonde fell to his knees. Why do I want to get the forbidden so badly?" Suddenly the priest heard someone's deep, calm voice. "I can ease your suffering. Come with me to get everything available to us in this world." The blonde looked up and saw a man with black, somewhat tangled hair and purple eyes in front of him. He was smiling at the vampire. Gulbacha took the offer of a stranger. He betrayed his love for Lilith and his unattainable dream of becoming a god. Why this, if there is someone who can give something more real, but no less attractive? Corridor of the theater. Gulbaha told the dark-haired woman not to worry. At the same time, he called the girl Nuna. She shuddered at this appeal. Only Alex used this name for her. Is his soul now in the body of a vampire priest? Gulbaha smiled. He joked to relax the girl a little, but his words had the opposite effect. Khan got angry. How dare this monster talk to her like Alex, who was hurt because of him? The girl loudly asked what happened to Alex. The blonde waved his hand and replied in a bored tone that little Richter would wake up as soon as he, Gulbacha, fell asleep. Lilith's heart awakened the head of the vampires briefly. It was too weak to ensure the constant vital activity of Gulbacha, and that, without the catalyst, which was the blood of the dark-haired woman, Lilith's heart would hardly have been able to summon the priest. Gulbaha suddenly burst out laughing. The vampire was amused that Lucius made such a small, thin, and scary girl as Khan his fodder. After a few minutes, the fair-haired man calmed down. He asked the girl where his friend was. The dark-haired woman realized that it was on Haiwan. Khan replied that the man was outside the maze that Alex was trying to lead her out of. "Of course," said the vampire. He snapped his fingers and red smoke filled the room. Gulbaha, in a slightly superior tone, ordered the dark-haired woman to follow the smoke. He will bring the girl to An Haiwan. Kang was supposed to convey to An Haiwan the words of the vampire priest. The dark-haired woman asked what words should be used to tell their entire conversation. The vampire arched an eyebrow. Of course not. Their conversation is empty chatter that won't mean anything to An Haiwan. The musician should only know that Gulbaha cannot be in his body for a long time. An Haiwan also has to prepare for Lilith's awakening. The seal on her heart is crumbling. Very soon the goddess will be released and take revenge on those who imprisoned her in 7 minerals 100 years ago. An Haiwan should hurry up with the plan he and Gulbaha made during their first meeting. Black-haired must become the ruler of the world, and the vampire, its master. After these words, Gulbacha disappeared. Alex was lying on the floor with his hands folded on his stomach. Not a trace remained from the wound on the boy's chest. It seems Gulbaha healed him with his magic. Or it was Lilith's heart that restored the little one. Khan didn't know about it, and didn't really want to. Now she was only worried about the boy's condition. The girl leaned over to the fair-haired man and quietly called him. The little one did not respond, but his breathing indicated that everything was normal. The dark-haired woman threw Alex on her healthy shoulder with some effort and slowly followed the red smoke. 15 minutes later, Khan finally reached the exit. The girl sighed. It was not easy to drag Alex several tens of meters, but the injured hand also made itself felt. "Miss Khan." The dark-haired woman turned her head to a familiar voice. An Haiwan was standing near the theater. His expression was tense. It occurred to the dark-haired woman that the musician was worried about her. But the dark-haired woman quickly rejected this assumption. Worried about me? What a delusion. Of course he was worried about Alex. More precisely, Gulbaka. Khan smiled sadly and said that everything was fine. An Haiwan didn't believe her words. He noted that the dark-haired woman's hand had a terrible appearance. If this is not taken care of now, the girl may lose a limb. Khan didn't answer, but simply handed Alex over to her husband. To the surprise of the dark-haired woman, the man did not even look at the little one. He even held him roughly, by the collar of his shirt, like a kitten that they want to drown. Han Hewan gave the blonde to his guards and told Kang that he was waiting for them and Alex at the front entrance because he didn't know how to destroy the maze. After all, he is not a vampire. The girl replied that she understood everything. Khan looked down. She had to tell her husband about Gulbaha, but she didn't know how to do it. An Hewan seems to have guessed that something is being hidden from him. Otherwise, he wouldn't be looking at Khan so expectantly. But the dark-haired woman was silent. The man, realizing that he would have to act, grabbed the girl by the waist and turned her towards him. The musician looked into the dark-haired woman's eyes and asked if she had met Gulbaka. "If so, what did he tell you, Miss Kang?" asked the man. "Tell me,"